Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. When people think about the staple buildings within a community, the structures that normally come to mind are hospitals, schools, fire and police stations, and supermarkets. One edifice that often gets overlooked, which is actually a hub within the community, is the library. Since their inception, libraries have been more than just a place to check out books. They have served as meeting spaces, holders of archives, and even sites for after-school activities. So how has the library evolved from the old card catalogues and microfilm to keep up with the demands of today's students and other users? Enter Nick Tanzi, who is a nationally recognized library technology consultant and author of the books Making the Most of Digital Collections Through Training and Outreach, and Best Technologies for Public Libraries, Policies, Programs, and Services. From 2019 to 2021, Mr. Tanzi has served as the column editor for public library magazines, The Wired Library. His work has also been featured in publications including Voya Magazine, Computers in Libraries, Library Journal, and Marketing Library Services. Today, we have him on loan from the South Huntington Library System, where he serves as the Assistant Director. Mr. Tanzi, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
No, thank you for having me, Kevin.
Oh, it's my pleasure, my pleasure. So tell me, first, before we get into our discussion, how did you get involved with being in the library system in the first place?
Yeah, so I've been working in libraries now for about 24, just shy of 25 years. Pretty much the second job I ever had was as a page, shelving materials, assisting the librarians. So pretty much started as a baby. Didn't necessarily have libraries in mind, but I think once you've been in a library, once you've really seen how it all works, it can be a real draw to seeing it as a career opportunity.
Okay, nice. Because I know when most people, especially people around my age, think about the library, you think of the old dusty card catalogs and going up and down aisles trying to find books that are never on the shelves, it seems like, and so forth. So tell us, what role traditionally has the local library played within our communities? Yeah,
so, it's kind of interesting because functionally, what libraries exist to do is to meet the informational and recreational needs of their communities. And that sounds kind of simple, but also expansive at the same time. And that goal is both basic, but also aspirational because the informational needs of the community changes over time. And that's partly why we see the impact of technology. It's also the nature of information changes. If you think of how the internet has kind of, really revolutionized information, social media, cloud computing, virtual and augmented reality, and now we see things like artificial intelligence. So that simple mission has really evolved over time.
Okay. And is there any clear difference between, say, the community library and, say, a community public library and a school library?
Sure, and I always put in the caveat that, I work in public libraries, and if somebody characterized my public library from an outsider's perspective, I would say, hey, maybe about 80% there. But the distinction I see, for example, with a school or academic library is kind of the users we serve. Tends to be more student-focused, and also those internal customers, oftentimes staff, educators and the like. But they also, again, exist to meet informational needs, oftentimes centered around curriculum, would be one of the differences.
Okay. And so do you also see, I guess, students or even teachers for that matter, who would normally have their school library, they often frequent the community library as well?
They do. And to some degree, there's overlapping, in terms of the collections, in terms of some of the services. But I think part of community building is really building those relationships to see where there's potential overlap so that there's not necessarily redundancy because none of us have enough money.
Right.
And for example, in South Huntington, we have a really good relationship with the school district where, in fact, we do professional development courses with the teachers so they can see the library as a potential resource both for them personally and professionally and for their students. While at the same time, we get a sense of what our school media partners in the school district, what their needs are, what they've invested in, so we can kind of intelligently spend our limited resources.
Yep.
And also kind of have that synergy. That's the best outcome for all involved.
I was going to ask about that, what the relationship is between and I hope I'm phrasing it properly, the community library and the local schools that are surrounding it. Because, most schools have a library within their buildings. Mm-hmm. But I know that community library, that community center, usually serves those students, I guess, after school hours especially. But is there another way or another layer to that relationship between the community library and the students and other people that serve in the neighborhood?
Yeah, so New York in particular is like a library-rich environment, we'll call it, partially because library services are mandated.
Right.
So you have access to that. The structure of libraries is a little interesting. They're different. Some of them are municipal. Many of them are what we call school district libraries, mm-hmm. which isn't to confuse matters, but basically their service area mirrors that school district taxing map.
Got it.
Which can be a layer of confusion mm-hmm. for some folks. So, we're inhabiting the same space. We're serving many of the same users, but there's a difference there. And for the public library, it's really pretty much anybody that walks in the door, they're ours.
Right.
Whereas with the school, obviously, that they have a particular population that they serve.
So we know that libraries are usually designed for information purposes, to give out information, whether it's students coming in to do some research for a term paper they have or whatever else that they're looking to do. But how can the library also be used to service the non-student in the neighborhood who may be looking for a particular career path or maybe even a change in careers? How can the library support them?
Sure. So the public library for a long time has done a lot with workforce development, job reskilling. It's the place where when folks, oftentimes maybe they've lost a job, technological disruption, mm-hmm. they don't have the tech skills per se when these things change because these are moving targets. They come in, we help them reskill, get those computer basics, and those basics, again, they change. Get them comfortable in that. We have, for example, learning software like LinkedIn Learning, or also it used to be called lynda.com,
okay.
Where people can reskill. We help them with their resumes. Even for small business development, their services, we connect them with experts like the Service Corps of Retired Executives. So there's a lot there. And then when we talk about how this mission has changed over time, now with things like virtual reality, I'll showcase one thing that I find pretty fascinating, which is in Clayton County, mm-hmm. Georgia. What they're doing now is they're using virtual reality. This is a community that, a lot of folks are below the poverty level. At the same time, there's economic opportunity in the trade skills, but folks don't necessarily have those certifications. So what they're doing is partnering with VR companies that actually offer training in things like HVAC. So they can get hands-on. You can bring that work, that factory into the library. They can get those skills, and then the library actually serves as a pipeline back into the community in those unfilled jobs, and even partner with other organizations like the court system, mm-hmm. To reduce recidivism. So when somebody has a criminal record, we know it's hard to find employment. They're actually finding them those job skills. They can retrain, re-enter the workforce. So that's that 21st century twist on
right.
things that we've been doing for a long time, back when it was Microsoft Word, getting that resume fixed, getting those internet basics back.
Yeah, it's interesting how you mentioned using virtual reality program and software to help train people, because I guess that's a real bonus when you think of it, or a cost-saving measure when you think of, especially for an HVAC system. If you're in an impoverished area where you don't have the funds necessarily to bring in a physical system to somebody to work on, at least through virtual reality, you can still have them kind of manipulating some of the tools and the things that they need, the components that they need in order to see this thing in action. I mean, it's being used in medical schools and in other places, so why not bring that to our libraries to help them with the people that they service?
Right, and that's when technology is working at its best. When it's solving problems, it's not inventing new ones. It doesn't feel like a layer of stuff you're adding that makes something more difficult. So once you have that kind of utility, that's kind of the right direction to go.
And how did, in your experience, how did the libraries kind of adjust to the whole pandemic era from the beginning, and then now that we're coming out of it? Have you seen any, I'm going to assume that when the pandemic started, there was a drop-off in attendance coming into the libraries. Have you seen that shift return to pre-pandemic levels since?
Yeah, so basically, like many of us, kind of the world stopped back in March 2020, and for many Suffolk County libraries, what we saw was, and I think Nassau County was very similar. So a pause for about anywhere between 3 and 5 months where a library shut down. For us, 4th of July was when the lights got turned back on. And so initially, there was a real virtualization of services. And everybody's 5-year plans went out the window. And a lot of programs and things that normally would happen in person, those happened virtually. A lot of the digital collections we had been investing in for a long time, we front-loaded those expenditures because, there was no point in getting physical books when nobody was coming in the physical building. Lights come back on, right? And now it's an interesting environment because when you're all the way open or you're all the way shut, they may not be fun, but they're easy to understand and plan for. And now what we have is the virtualization of services. Some folks like that, and that's their preferred way of doing things. They don't want to come in the building. If they can take a class online through us, they're happy to do that. Or they've discovered ebooks and streaming movies and music, all of these new things we've invested in, and that's their preference. And then you have the user, that wants to come in the physical building and enjoys that personal connection. So we're in that weird area where, certainly the door count has dropped to a degree, and it's starting to come back, and that's been the trend, is to come back, especially the bigger programs. I think everybody has that kind of invisible number that they're comfortable with other people in a room. And as that continues to climb, we see the door count climbing. The trickier part for us is that resource allocation for the in-person user and the virtual user and getting that balance right when there's no new money coming.
I can imagine. And how do you determine the types of programming that you're going to be able to offer to the community? So if there's somebody looking for a computer class or a chess program or anything else that may be a rumba class or something like that, how do you know what you're going to offer to a community and how are you able to do so?
Yeah, so I'm happy to say most libraries are pretty risk averse, but we do come out of our shells, and what we see is most of us will try anything one time, okay? Yeah, we want to be user-driven, and sure, there's data. You see how many people go to a program, and then it has to be a good investment ultimately. Okay. You never like the cold equations of these things, but there has to be a certain return on investment because it's an expenditure of taxpayer money, and you want to make sure that folks they enjoy it and they come to it. The interesting piece of that, though, is with the virtualization of programs, that gives us the flexibility to engage in programs that are maybe a little niche and normally we'd only get a couple people at individual libraries, but then we can easily partner because we're taking the physical location out of it. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for people to be driving all the way a couple towns over to come to a program, but from the comfort of their own home, it makes a lot of sense. We're able to make kind of these ad hoc collaborations with other libraries and offer programming that normally just wouldn't have the door count needed to justify it.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is nationally recognized library technology consultant and author of the books Making the Most of Digital Collections Through Training and Outreach and The Best Technologies for Public Libraries, Policies, Programs, and Services. Assistant Director of the South Huntington Public Library, Nick Tanzi. You raised something when you were talking about the services and the programs that you provide. Are those programs, when they're in person at least, are they limited to the catchment area of the library, or can people from those other towns who get wind of those programs also show up?
Short answer is it depends.
Okay.
Occasionally some programs will be restricted to cardholder only. Other times there'll be a kind of a halfway in, which will be preferences given to cardholders in that particular district, and then it opens after a set period of time. And then there's stuff where anything goes. And typically it's that same thing with resource allocation. If we can meet the needs, we're happy to do it. But ultimately, that's kind of what drives things.
Right. So I guess it's merely a capacity type of thing. So if the room can only hold a certain number of people, you're going to give preference to those people who are within your general catchment area first. And then if there's any space left over, then maybe we can allow other people in.
Yep. It's basically space and resources, because occasionally, too, there's, either the third party we're working with has a dollar amount in mind that the library absorbs that cost, depending on the user, or there's a material cost involved.
I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk a little bit about your website, the Digital Librarian. How did that come about, and what are some of the things that you talk about on that site?
Sure. So, I do a lot of writing, but writing's never come easy for me. And because I write a lot about technology, we know that the shelf life can be limited, right? It moves pretty quick. And so traditional publishing for me, while I've done it for a long time, it goes out the door and you're ready thinking of revisions you'd like to make to it. So having something that was more akin to a blog that I could kind of write as it popped in my head and it was fresh and had that sense of immediacy, I found that pretty valuable. And so it's basically that, and it's kind of a creative outlet too, because I do enjoy the intersection of libraries and technology.
With that enjoyment fact that you speak about, how has the library embraced the technology, or how has it evolved along with the needs of the technology as well?
Yeah, so basically, libraries are very good at, we think of ourselves as the equalizer, right? That open access to information. And what we find is we're navigating our community through disruption. And technological disruption, especially recently, is something that we see a lot.
Right.
New technology comes out, tends to confuse a lot of people. It has an impact to the job market oftentimes. And folks are confused. They're a little angsty about this stuff. New tech is always prohibitively expensive for the individual, but it becomes organizationally affordable for the library much sooner than the individual. We can afford to drop $5,000 on a 3D printer. Your average home user, is not going to do that. There's some folks that do, and affordable is a variable term for the individual. But that's kind of where we come in, that early access and that early kind of contextualizing the information. Doesn't mean we all figure it out. It oftentimes means just that access. You don't know what that new learner is going to discover, where they're going to take that technology, how it's going to be applied. But that's pretty much what we try to do. We try to digest the new technology, train up our staff, be in a position to provide information and early access to the community. As soon as we get comfortable with that, something new comes out. And that's the nature of it.
That's the nature of technology, exactly. I mean, just look at the typical iPhone. Every time when you get used to all the gadgets the iPhone has, a new edition comes out, right?
And that's a great point, too, is there's new technologies, and then there's technologies that simply mature and evolve over time, and that becomes its own added layer of complexity to it.
With the emerging technologies and the new technologies that are available, especially now that we have artificial intelligence, how has I'm sure you've gotten a lot of questions about this new Chat GPT and other forms of AI that have been developed. So how have your library as well as others handled those questions? And I would imagine that some libraries are probably better equipped to deal with those issues than others.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation because it moves so quickly, and there's pretty much no safeguards. There's no guardrails. I'm not here to knock the speed of government, but we know that even when a company as lean as like a Google finds themselves flat-footed, and all of a sudden they're kind of fighting the search engine wars again with Microsoft because of how quick this technology moved. We're kind of operating in an absence of, again, those guardrails and those
regulations, exactly.
So that's part of our challenge early on, is determining what does ethical AI look like in a library, because we're kind of weirdos when you think about it, because we absorb a lot of technology. We're really almost akin to software companies. We have so much going on, But what makes us weird is that we actually have a commitment to user privacy in a way that, big tech does not.
Right.
And so, we need to absorb these tools. There's certainly the workplace productivity tools. They're changing the nature of research, of scholarship, and art. And that's also a contentious area as well, with the intellectual property rights still getting figured out there. So that's really the immediate challenge for us, is thinking about, to what degree does this require new policy, which none of us like writing, or can we see AI through the lens of existing policy? Because once you have that in place and we know what its use can look like, then we can train our staff. We're still in a position now to navigate these texts and be able to introduce our community to things like ChatGPT, along with the privacy implications that are often poorly understood, with generative AI and things like Midjourney that can produce art. But that's pretty much the immediate problem.
So, and let's take a quick half a step back a little bit. Have you run into issues or with students coming in and, I guess, doing not so ethical things with the computers, and how would you normally handle those situations?
Yeah, well, it's very tricky because, again, we're dealing with where there's not a lot of law. And so we know that, legality is not the same as, legal and ethical are two different things.
Yep.
I don't have a ton of use cases where I can point and say, whoa, what you're doing there, you can't do. I don't think that there's a lot of actual malice with this stuff. A lot of what my concern is, especially when we talk about students, is, we live in the world of fake news and also just a lack of formal media literacy training. There's only one state in the United States that mandates K through 12 media literacy for their students. That's New Jersey, and that's pretty new. And when you get in, so for example, when a person sees an article and there's an image and that image has a caption, whether it's made up or not, that image reinforces, and that caption, they play together. With generative AI, you can type up pretty much anything and it'll create that image for you. And so, whatever you write becomes the reality. So without any of these requisite media literacy skills, you almost feel like you're doomed. And that's the thing I'm most concerned with. Isn't so much somebody behaving unethically, it's them being the victim of unethical behavior, of, your kind of fake news on steroids.
So would that be a type of topic that you would kind of partner with the local school teachers, maybe an ELA teacher or a history teacher, to help to teach that to their students? Because I would imagine that when students are doing research papers, they're going to Google and they're typing in whatever they're looking for, and then they get these millions of hits come back. And so how would they know how to discern what is accurate information, what is inaccurate information, what's a primary source, what's a secondary source, what's a non-source, and so forth? So would that be something that you would be able to give support to the local school district on how to teach that to their students?
So typically with any topic, what we try to do is either build that in-house expertise or we find the referral information. And that can be materials, but oftentimes that's a person that's qualified to give that information. And I think that's very much where we're at, is assessing what are good sources of information and who are people who can provide. It's interesting, too, when you talk about when you're looking for stuff, now there's the issue of AI authorship and what does that even mean, So, yeah, there's a lot to grapple with.
Yeah, because it would seem that with the whole AI authorship idea, that it's almost going to be like a circular reference type of deal happening, because the AI is creating its own material, and then, of course, it's going to refer back to itself, and then where does it stop?
Yeah, it's really difficult because it moves so quickly, because at the same time that we're concerning ourselves with AI authorship, Microsoft is rolling out basically Microsoft Office backed by the generative AI of ChatGPT, of OpenAI. I feel like ultimately we're heading towards a point where, as much as we try to figure out what's human authorship, what's collaborative with AI, it's almost besides the point. It's, it would be like me saying, well, if you type it out on the computer, it's not the same as hitting it on a typewriter. It's really going to be that kind of synergist relationship with human intelligence and artificial intelligence.
Since you bring up the typewriters and keyboarding, does the library offer, or at least South Huntington, does it offer those skills like courses in keyboarding skills and typing? Because I know that growing up, we had an actual typing course in junior high school. So we went in and had a room full of typewriters, which I'm sure kids today have no clue what they look like. But at least we learned the basic rudimentary skills on where the keys on the keyboard are and how to use them in a way that we're not hunting and pecking with two fingers. So does the library also offer those types of services?
Yeah, so libraries, and South Huntington included, offer tons of classes that are computer basics, but also your mobile devices. We're seeing the rise of things like smart speakers now, and folks need help using those effectively. Yeah. Smart TVs, your mobile devices now that can do that have your virtual assistants. These things all evolve, and basically, and this almost circles back to your question of what's that magic number of people that have to go to a class?
Right.
You offer these things on a cycle, and the need subsides over time, but you do revisit it if you see it popping back up again. The other thing that many libraries do are one-on-one tech appointments. So we'll actually meet with some people for anywhere between half an hour to an hour on their specific concern with technology and help them out. We don't do computer repair,
right?
But we definitely help folks troubleshoot and learn those skills that oftentimes doesn't make a lot of sense in a classroom setting, but does on a one-on-one basis.
Okay, I think that's a really good point to make out. But if you had to leave our audience with one final thought about how libraries should be used within our communities and how they actually do service our communities, what would that thought be?
Yeah, well, I think our libraries really try to be user responsive. So when you come and you ask and you demonstrate the need, that's where we meet you. So oftentimes I think we kind of come into the library and we look at what is and think that's how it always has to be. But we've always done a very good job evolving. In these last few years, these pandemic years, you can see how quick we can pivot. So that would be my suggestion is when you see a need, even if you don't think that's a traditional library thing, you'd be surprised.
Well, we would certainly like to thank our guest today, nationally recognized library technology consultant and author of the books Making the Most of Digital Collections Through Training and Outreach and Best Technologies for Public Libraries, Policies, Programs, and Services, the Assistant Director of the South Huntington Public Library, Nick Tanzi, for coming on to our show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.